Hi, I'm Mitra Sorrells, Senior Reporter at PhocusWire, and I am delighted to be your host for today's New Reality With. This series of one-to-one interviews with industry leaders is sponsored by Medallia. Technology is helping hotels transform up to 80% of guest experiences into contactless interactions. Learn more from the leader in customer experience at medallia.com. For this episode, we welcome Andres Fabris, founder and CEO of Traxo. It's a leader in travel data capture and itinerary intelligence for business travel. Andres, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
It's good to see you. I think the last time I saw you was almost exactly a year ago at the PhocusWright conference in Fort Lauderdale.
That sounds about right. Yes, last November.
A lot has changed since then, for sure.
Indeed.
So let's think back to the early days of this pandemic. Seems like a lifetime ago in some ways. What are one or two things that you would do differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think we were all shocked at the magnitude and the speed of this particular pandemic. I remember being must have been January, February with a small group of industry folks, and we were talking about the overreaction. And so just kind of looking back, I think we would have all been done right to take it more seriously. During times like that, when there's just incredible uncertainty, for us, we just kind of went back to first principles. And we knew in order to have a business, we had to take care of our employees. So we started with that, and must have been late February, just let everyone work from home, kind of started to shut down travel. Then we focused on the business, just to make sure it was well positioned, from a cash perspective. We did made a series of changes around just reducing our cost structure, increasing our cash position, and then we focused on just listening, super carefully to our clients, to our customers, and figuring out what we could do to help. Right as it's playing out, the natural inclination is to try to contribute in some manner. And so for us, we were just trying to get as much signal from the market, hearing what needs were out there with our corporate clients to try to proactively address those.
So we'll talk a bit about what you have been hearing, but let me just ask. So you had a lot of momentum toward the end of last year. You had gotten the multi-million-dollar equity investment from ARC.
Yep.
You were developing the Traxo marketplace with apps from some other providers like Freebird and Rocket Trip. How has the crisis impacted some of your priorities?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. It was a shock because we were coming off of a very good end of 2019 with the ARC investment. And literally we're at a show in London, and we're record January, record February, record March. And then kind of the COVID impact happens. Obviously, first and foremost, it's, you think about the impact on human life, and then you figure, okay, what do we need to do? Catch our breath. Let's figure out what we need to do as a business to survive, to do right by the customers. Luckily, and to kind of give you an indication of how rosy the picture was, late last year, we hired 3 additional sales folks in February, to give you an idea, right? So we were getting ready to hit the gas from a sales and marketing perspective. And then suddenly, right, you basically have to kind of pull back almost entirely. And it's a very different set of discussions that we needed to have at that point. We recall a couple of stories as this is all playing out with our customers, particularly one in Canada where, it was a moving target. Canadian government's issuing regulations around quarantine, and customers were coming to us saying, look, we deployed Traxo. We know you have the data. We're not really trained up on it, but I've got a call with my CEO tomorrow. Can you please help me? Because I need to be able to track just employee history. Who's been where in terms of travel? So that was kind of an interesting development that we knew that people cared about. Okay, where is my traveler now? Where are they going to be in the future? And just overnight, it became important to have a really detailed trip history of where people had been, right? If you think back to that March timeframe, everybody's worried around who had been to Northern Italy, for example.
Right.
And so we just kind of double down on a lot of those efforts to try to make that data easier, more available. We've just added kind of travel and safety aspects of the product that hadn't previously existed.
Yeah. So, and actually that kind of leads right into what I was going to bring up next, which is really the heart of what you do is visibility into corporate bookings made on any channel. I of course, it seems COVID has accelerated interest in that then, the need to have a really holistic view of where people.
It has, and it kind of switched the priority. So late last year, I would say the primary use case around having that full visibility was mostly around savings and spending. Are we as efficient as possible? Are my employees booking the proper negotiated rates? Might I be able to reshop these rates through some of our partners and save a bit of money? And then the second one on the list that was always kind of important was duty of care and safety, but it was always hard to quantify, and a good enough effort was sufficient at that point. And then literally in March, we saw those two flip, and there's this previously unquantifiable benefit around safety suddenly became imperative, binary. Like, I have to have it. How can I possibly open up my travel program, send my people back out into the wild if I don't know exactly who is going to be where, regardless of where they book, right? And so visibility has always been there. If travelers book through the approved channels, the approved online booking tools, the approved TMCs or agencies of record. But we all know that not everybody does that, for good reason or bad. And so suddenly it became critically important to have that full visibility, even if the employee had not booked through the approved channel. And so we redoubled our efforts right around duty of care. We put in place a series of partnerships so that we could provide a visibility ourselves, but more importantly, we could get the data wherever it needed to go. We could get it over to the duty of care partnerships, like with International SOS, with World Aware, with others. And so in the second quarter, we got all the employees together and said, okay, we were previously kind of all things to all people. We could detect the data, we could save money, we could focus on duty of care, but let's focus, let's set aside all these other priorities and we have to make it all about employee safety. And then from there, we went and we try to contribute a bit to the industry with thought processes around, okay, what are the steps to the recovery? And we started to put out a little bit of content around that, just to kind of help guide the industry based on what we were hearing from others.
So I'm curious, first of all, how challenging has it been to develop new business when industry trade shows have either been canceled or have gone completely virtual? Just today, we heard that ITB has announced its March event will be fully virtual. I'd imagine there's some challenges around that.
Yeah, for sure. Because I would say the number one source for prospecting and sales activity for us historically had been those in-person events. Been to PhocusWire 10 years of running in a row, right? So yeah. It's been a huge part of our marketing. And so suddenly that went away. And so what we did in the very short term is launched our own series, just our own webinar series. And we literally thought about, okay, what can we do to help? Well, we've got a small army of corporate travel managers that we know, they're thought leaders, that what if we just pulled them all together and stepped back and just said, look, this is a forum for you guys to share ideas, ask questions, determine what's working, what's not working. And so that was a decision we made in that March timeframe, and we're now on probably our sixth monthly webinar, and it's been a great opportunity for us to continue to get the word out around Traxo, but also, even more importantly, a great opportunity to pull the corporate travel managers together and just facilitate sharing of information.
So let's talk about what you're hearing then from some of those corporate travel managers. There's a million different assumptions or guesstimates on what's going to be happening and what the recovery is going to look like, the time frame, whether it's going to come back to the same level, that sort of thing. If let's start with kind of an optimistic view. If we get a vaccine, let's say in the next 6 months or so, and things somewhat start to get back to what we would consider kind of normal, do you think that business travel will get back to the levels that it was at fairly quickly? If we have that kind of optimistic timeline for the recovery?
Yeah, I mean, the way I think about it is, let's just kind of define 2019 as that's back to 2019 levels is a recovery, right? And so then it's a question of how long do we think it's going to take to get to that level? We know that the recovery is going to skew domestic prior to international. We know it's going to skew leisure prior to corporate. We have our ear pretty close to the ground in terms of just a whole series of clients, and we can see the data across corporations, expense, duty of care. And so we've got a pretty good visibility just into how it's progressing on the corporate side. And just a couple of kind of metrics. In July, we were at 8% of prior year. So July of 2020 was only 8% of 2019 levels, right? So it was down 92%. By August, it had climbed up to 19%, September, 25%, and my estimate for October is around 30%. So you could say maybe we're about 1/3 through the recovery. So an incredibly long way to go. And then it's an estimate of, okay, how long is that going to take? Is it going to take 12 months? Probably not. My sense is it's going to take a bit longer. I'd be surprised if it takes full 2 years from today, right? So my sense is by the middle of 2022, we will be back to kind of 2019 levels and just kind of having absorbed all of this. So it will end up having, taken 2.5, 3 years. So that's, fun that nobody wanted, but we will recover. It will recover. It'll get back to those levels. There will be some adjustments, but I think in terms of overall activity, we can look forward to, the industry resuming, for all the reasons that I'm sure have been mentioned. Right?
Yeah, that strikes me as a fairly optimistic view, I have to say, just based on some of the things I've read. I know McKinsey has come out with some research that says it could be 2024 before we're back to the 2019 levels. But I guess even just that assumption of the 2019 levels as the metric, there's also talk that business travel is not going to come back to the levels of, maybe leisure travel will get back to 2019 levels, but that business travel, corporate travel is kind of fundamentally changing because of things such as this and technology. And certainly over the next coming years, this technology is only going to improve. I think there's a lot of work happening in that area to fill that need. So, what does that potentially mean if the whole business travel sector is just smaller, even once it's back?
Yeah, I don't necessarily buy that, meaning at a certain level, it will resume and exceed 2019 levels. We're already feeling, on our team, what I call Zoom fatigue, right? So for a while, it was novel. We started, company virtual happy hours, and now just adding one more Zoom, even though it's a fun Zoom at the end of a long day, at the end of a long week, is difficult, right? So I think the craving for human connection is there. People are already kind of jumping at the opportunity to try to get out there. From a leisure perspective, there's, phenomenal deals. So that's kind of training folks to say, oh, okay, it's possible to do this safely. What we really need is offices to reopen, right? Because without offices open, there's no place to go and have that business meeting. Right. There are definitely going to be changes. We're already seeing it. Perhaps more openness around multimodal transportation. So short duration, I'm probably more open to rent a car, take my own vehicle, bus service, right? There was a company that recently got funded. I think they're Series C. Yeah. So that's an indication that, okay, bus service is likely a new alternative. There's some rail activity, right? Silver rail activity just in the past week, yet another form of transportation. So yeah, I think folks will get creative, but there's a ton of pent up demand. And I think we will resume to, kind of pre-COVID levels in that, 24-month timeframe or so.
Speaking of the need for just offices to reopen, I'm curious your thoughts about how difficult it will be for business travel to recover in markets where there's potentially a mandatory quarantine. That's something we've heard a lot about. I think some of the big associations and organizations have come out to say, that really creates some roadblocks.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, if you have a required 14-day quarantine when you arrive at that market, that certainly adds a ton of friction. And I think that will certainly dampen. But my bet is that those types of restrictions, that we're not talking about those types of restrictions, a year from now.
Right.
In terms of our own approach to corporate travel and our own offices, we are 100% fully distributed, working from home, and have been since late February, early March. We were already kind of set up to do that effectively, just given our heritage. We started as a distributed team. And so we had a lot of those systems in place around shared drives, and already had been using Zoom and Slack and other tools. I do anticipate, and so interesting story for us. We were our lease of 5 years miraculously was up in March, and so it was fairly convenient for us. But we had already done an office search. We were prepared to sign a lease, and we paused that. But for us, I think there is a desire for us to return to an office setting, but it'll probably be in this kind of hybrid mode. It'll be just a lot more relaxed around giving employees freedom, choice, flexibility. We had already done that. Previously we tend to attract people that really enjoy traveling. So we had one gentleman that would sail half the year and write code when he arrived in the harbor. One of our front-end developers was in an RV for a full year. One of our designers took a road trip from Portland to the southern tip of Argentina while working for us. So we've been super relaxed about it, but there is that desire for connection and collaboration. So we will have an office. It might be as early as maybe the second quarter of 2021. It'll probably be a much smaller footprint. So maybe half the square footage, but it'll be a place for us to converge, host clients, host investors, host board meetings, all of that. But it'll be designed around primarily that collaboration, and we'll continue to provide folks with just a ton of flexibility, especially Mondays, Fridays, and we'll probably center on some kind of schedule where, all right, midweek, let's all converge and let's kind of try to resume normalcy and collaborate as much as we can in person.
Yeah. So that whole, distributed workforce, or even, kind of work from anywhere concepts, that is also really starting to have an impact and will have an impact long-term on what business travel really means. I read some reports discussing the concept that when everyone is working from anywhere, then there is a bit more of a need to occasionally bring people together. So it creates a little bit of a different dynamic around what business travel actually looks like. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the industry conferences will play perhaps an even larger role, because there will be a kind of craving for that type of connection, especially if, offices are smaller and less pronounced. If you're in a sales role, I mean, there's no replacement for that face-to-face, right? Human connection, sitting across from your colleagues or your partners or your prospects. So, I don't anticipate, over time that it's dramatically different. Of course, over the next 24 months, we'll all be figuring out and making adjustments. But, the desire for humans to explore and connect I think is pretty innate, and I don't think that changes.
So let's talk a bit about some of the sectors within travel. First of all, getting back to, you made the comment about multimodal, and potentially we will start to see some more of that. I'm curious your thoughts about the impact on some of the large airlines. We hear that business travel accounts for as much as 75% of the profits for some of the really big carriers. Any?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an uphill battle. You got to feel for the airlines. Record years, record quarters and months leading up to this, and then suddenly just the shock of all shocks. So, yeah, certainly an uphill battle for airlines, perhaps for hotels. I think hotels, latest stats I've been seeing is that occupancy, at least domestically here in the States, is already up to about 50%. Average daily rates are starting to climb back up. So, hope is in sight. I think that's most of that is leisure. Right. If you use our metric that we're about 25-30% recovered on corporate side, that would imply leisure is probably 50 to 70% recovered. I think there will continue to be great deals that get people out, and then once they're out and they just see, okay, the airports are taking this seriously, the hotels are taking this seriously, the airlines are taking this seriously. That they'll bring that back and say, okay, it's safe to start resuming essential travel initially, and then over time, more and more, like a larger and larger percentage of what would typically be corporate travel.
Yeah, and actually, your comment there about hotels, we have a question here for the chain 4 and 5-star hotel sector and the potential for a massive drop in business travel. How might they evolve with that huge drop in guests? Because, you referenced that, the occupancy rates and coming back and things, but from what we're hearing, it's really varied across the different categories of hotels. Some of the extended stay have done fairly well, some of the more economy level, but those, big chain hotels that really count on that business traveler.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that those, right, if I'm deciding where I'm going to stay, I need kind of that promise, the brand promise, the consistency. And I think those hotels, the chain hotels and the ones that skew kind of in that 4 to 5-star level, at least have a perception that they can more consistently deliver on that promise, whether that promise is safety, sanitation, just adherence to the procedures. I can also see where extended stay for different reasons and Airbnbs for different reasons, might be more appealing, even within the corporate context than previously, right? Airbnb, you get a little bit more of the isolation if that's important.
Right.
Extended stay, you just have the ability to, do more things, cook for yourself, and not be quite as exposed if that's important. But yeah, I think there'll be counterbalancing forces between what you described as the 4 and 5-star chains dependency on corporate travel, but I think there's a flight to quality in these types of situations when there's a lot of uncertainty. For folks that have to travel, they're probably focused on the safest possible experience, even if perhaps it costs a little bit more.
Yeah, and we're certainly hearing about some creative solutions being developed about using that hotel space in different ways. I know Citizen M has come out with a subscription plan, again, related to those distributed workers and trying to give them a place to come back together. What about the concept of air corridors? We're hearing, that being discussed for international business travel, let's say between London and New York. Do you think that's an effective solution?
Is that kind of more of a charter approach?
I'll be honest with you. I don't know the details. I just know I've seen, buzz about maybe there could be an air corridor where there could, it could a faster resumption of travel between key business.
Yeah, I could see that. Air corridors, rail corridors between those major metropolitan areas. Yeah, I think we hadn't really touched on it, but I'm hearing kind of more rumblings and questions around charter flights, private flights, smaller planes, again, just to limit the contacts along the way. And I think that approach, if that's what's intended around the corridors, more of a shuttle service specifically geared for corporate audience with an extra emphasis on safety, I think that makes a lot of sense to me.
Just getting back to the topic of private accommodation, and Airbnb is getting ready to have its IPO. We have a question: could we see a wider shift to private accommodation for business travelers?
Yeah, I believe so. We had already, like, if we were traveling and we had a group offsite, we were just kind of running the math and saying, okay, well, we got 5 people coming in, 3 or 4 room nights, per person. You do the math and it becomes pretty economical. It's a little bit different for folks to kind of wrap their head around to say, okay, I'm not going to have my own private bathroom. But, we were in the startup, right, scrappy mode. And so it made sense for us. It may not make sense for all businesses, but I think, Airbnb and other types of accommodations that are perhaps even more centrally located that have that brand promise. Sonder comes to mind as well, that could see a nice surge in activity for the reasons there that we discussed, right, around isolation and just staying together with a small group that you trust, or circle of trust that you all kind of share a common approach or connection with the same business.
Right. So let's, I had went back just to verify that I had the date right, but Traxo was launched in April of 2008. I have that right?
That is correct. Yes.
Yeah, kind of right in the midst of the financial crisis.
Leading up to it. Yes.
Probably a lot we could talk about what you've learned from there, and maybe get into some of your tips for startup founders right now. But first, what innovation could come out of this crisis, do you think? There were actually so many successful companies today launched back then.
I think innovation tends to thrive in economic downturns. We certainly saw that in 2008. We've seen it previously with kind of low-cost carriers and their focus on the cost side, in prior downturns. But I think there's a couple of reasons for that, right? So in this environment, the large businesses, a couple of things happen, right? There's a cost focus, a return to the core, less available dollars to invest in things like innovation. And at the same time, there's probably a flooding of talent, the talent pool increasing in the industry, right? And that's unfortunately as a result of furloughs and layoffs. And so you have folks that had perhaps been thinking about an idea that now are even more motivated to pursue it. And so we've seen that, time and time again over the years, that where you get an increase in the talent pool with the time and ability to focus and less innovation on the corporate side, that's a perfect breeding ground for these types of innovations. We for us, when we started in early 2008, it was prior to the downturn. So I would say we were already, going along. We had already, burnt the boats. Like there was past the point of no return. We'd already raised capital from, friends and family. And so we just, kept our heads down and focused on, investing in the product. We did start with a little bit more of a consumer focus in those early days.
Right.
And we've since morphed into an entirely B2B focus. Just over the years, we found that was a much more scalable way of growing a business like ours. I do think, one last point on the innovation, I do think it'll come from insiders as opposed to outsiders. I do think it'll be, veterans of the industry, but pursuing the innovation outside of the comfort of the corporate entity. And the reason for that is, with an industry as complex as travel, you need to know, the structure of the industry, the flow of the data, the flow of the economics, the profit pools, the relationships, the connections, having that network. And I think that's difficult to do from folks that are either entirely outsiders or folks that haven't lived in the industry long enough. So, there's plenty of examples. We see wonderful entrepreneurs coming out perhaps more mature, more experienced, but then really being able to focus on innovation. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, just a thought that occurred to me as you're saying that about the need to understand the industry and the networking and all of that. I suppose the barrier to entry for that is a bit lower now that a lot of events and conferences are virtual with a lower ticket price. Those little startup founders and entrepreneurs out there that couldn't afford a plane ticket and a ticket to a big event 2-3 years ago now can join something virtually. But I'm curious, actually, so that leads to my question related to where there is an opportunity for innovation. I'm wondering what you think is kind of ripe for fixing, whether in travel itself or even related to this concept of the virtual events that I think are probably here to stay. What do you find it's effective to try to network and such virtually?
It's a start, right? But it's not a replacement. I've been surprised at how well produced some of these virtual shows are. We kind of went into it wanting to learn okay, what does the future look like? And both the platforms. So I think there's going to be a ton of innovation around virtual platforms for trying to replicate those connections. And I've been pretty amazed and pretty pleased. It's helpful for now, right? But it's not a substitute. So I don't think that an entrepreneur that attends one event and pitches is necessarily right. That's a ticket to unlock the industry. Our industry, I think, unfortunately, because of the complexity, just you got to continue to peel back the onion. We got to continue to develop those relationships, and it just becomes a lot easier when you understand the structure of the industry and you have those connections in the network in place. And I think that comes over time, right? Just by continuing to get out there. In terms of other if right, it's almost binary now that in order for travel to reopen, you have to keep employees safe, right? If you cannot account for their location, if you can't see to their proper duty of care from an employee perspective, risk management from a corporate perspective, it's really, really difficult to feel comfortable reopening your travel program. So I think there's going to be a lot of activity and innovation around that. How do I minimize gaps in visibility? How do I move data around? There's a lot of focus these days I see on APIs. So it started around human interfaces, graphical interfaces, UI, UX around a human interacting with a system or a computer. And now it's a lot more around computers talking to computers, and the language that they do that through are these APIs. And so I think we'll continue to see a lot of focus on APIs, organization of information. The other phrase that I've heard recently that I really like is a whole set of microservices that are emerging, especially around corporate travel. So I think we'll see an unbundling of the traditional stack of services that were offered to corporations, corporate travel services offered to corporations, and corporations will just have an incredible amount of additional choice that they didn't previously have, because previously they were kind of dependent on their service providers, and they would have to take the precise stack of services that were provided to them, right? And they would run the RFP process, and then they would commit to, okay, I'm going to use this stack of services. But with so much innovation occurring in travel and a lot of these APIs becoming available, now corporations and corporate travel managers have a tremendous amount of choice to be able to mix and match the best services for them. So I want to use this service for duty of care. I want to use that service for expense. I want to use a third service for reshop, a different one, or price assurance, a different one for flight disruptions. And that can be customized at the individual company level. And so that's a kind of a unique new innovation that we see that I think ultimately helps drive innovation. It helps keep the larger, perhaps legacy companies a bit more honest in terms of where they invest their product dollars, and then it gives a lot of these up and coming businesses a greater chance of landing those large corporate clients because of the flexible approach that they bring.
One of the themes that we've continued to hear is about the need for cross-sector collaboration during the recovery period. What are your thoughts on that and the opportunities and whether that's realistic?
Yeah, no, we're definitely seeing that. A couple of quick examples that weren't for aspects of the travel industry that weren't previously connected that are now kind of coming together. So we're getting requests for, hey, can you move my rideshare Uber Lyft data over to duty of care, right? And so that was a connection that probably wasn't in place because it wasn't a typical air car hotel booking. This was something that was made directly by the traveler. So that's one small example. Another example, I don't know if you've heard the phrase, but it continues to come up around omni-channel, right? An omni-channel strategy, which basically means providing support for the traveler so that they can book through whatever channel they choose. And frankly, they could start perhaps shopping in one channel and then consummate the transaction in a different channel. And so we're starting to see requests around that as well, which is, well, just because somebody books outside of the approved channel or perhaps directly with the supplier doesn't mean we shouldn't have proper duty of care. Doesn't mean that I don't want those bookings to make it into the expense report. It doesn't mean that just because it started as a supplier direct transaction, I don't want to provide it, to my agency or to my TMC so they can help service and support it. And so those are really interesting examples where that doesn't exist today. I think it's an absolute need. I think that should drive a lot of innovation to try to solve that problem where perhaps a booking can start on the supplier side and then be passed and properly serviced over on the TMC side, which is just, right, their entire business is geared towards providing the best possible service and support. And a lot of businesses don't have a choice, right, for after hours coverage. It's all dependent on the TMC. So I'd like to see those aspects of the industry kind of get closer together, data move more seamlessly throughout. And obviously that's informing where we're making some of our product investment decisions from a Traxo perspective.
So we have another question here from a viewer. It says, hi, Andres, thanks for doing this. Let's get to the nitty gritty here. Lower volumes in business travel, a bunch of big TMCs, what gives? And what about companies such as TripActions and others? Do they have an opportunity or not?
Yeah, interesting question, right? So to me, what comes up when I hear that combination is perhaps an emphasis or an opportunity to revisit the underlying business model around TMCs, right? Today, it's almost entirely transaction based. I will say personally, one of the lessons learned going back to the emergence of COVID and our reaction as a business to it, I have a newfound appreciation for the value of subscription revenue over transaction revenue, right? So we've benefited. We already had a focus. I'd say 80% of our revenue was subscription based. We've now taken steps to kind of move that to about 100%, 95, 100%, simplified our pricing further. And so I think part of the answer for TMCs, so back to the question, is a willingness on behalf of both the TMC and the corporation to revisit that model. I don't think it can be pure subscription based. And I think you end up with a hybrid. So that's a potential path forward that helps soften some of the dramatic swings that we've been seeing from a volume and a transaction perspective. Onto TripActions and Lola and Uptake and Travel Perks, and there's a lot of investment, coming into the travel industry, all geared towards building a better approach to booking, a better engine, more content, more intuitive, better UI, better service and support. I think they can make progress. I think they can make progresses in the SMB sector. I think it's difficult for these new entrants to have the full portfolio of solutions that are necessary to tackle the large enterprises, the multinational footprint, the ability to move data and integrate it. And so, yes, they'll continue to see progress and traction, but I anticipate a bit limited in terms of tackling the massive, right, largest 100 corporate travel spenders. I think that'll be a bit out of reach for the new entrants, and that'll still continue, to be the playground for the large TMCs, especially now with the whole multinational approach. Right, you've got to have the ability to support your clients across the globe. The need for that isn't going away; it's increasing.
That could probably lend itself to a full panel discussion just on that topic right there. So we're getting a little bit tight on time, so we'll leave that where it is for now. But quickly, before we wrap up, 2 questions for you. First of all, can you give us just 1 or 2 of the priorities for Traxo in the coming year? What is the next evolution for Traxo?
Yeah, for us, it's doubling down, tripling down on our partnerships. We've been putting in place partnerships with the TMC channel. Kind of the revelation there is, I think TMCs are quickly coming to the conclusion that they can no longer afford to have gaps in visibility, that the corporations are relying on them to know as much as possible about all of the employees and all of the travel, regardless of where those bookings have occurred. We're seeing a lot of interest in moving data, again, regardless of channel, over to the duty of care providers. So we've got to focus on a series of partnerships around duty of care, expense integrations. There's still a focus on the cost side, the saving side, right? Budgets are tighter than ever. So having full visibility, perhaps right up front, is imperative. We're seeing, a nice side effect for us is COVID has just triple underscored the need for that comprehensive data. And, we have a unique ability to deliver that in the industry currently. So we will continue to emphasize and scale up our sales and marketing, a bit of a regional focus as well. We've primarily been focused on the North American market. It's just in our backyard. It's what we know. But we're starting, we have a toehold in Europe. Some of our clients are deploying our solution across the European market, Asia Pacific market. I think you'll see us also expand into APAC late this coming year. And then, of course, we'll continue to invest in the product, keep our ear close to the ground, emphasize the safety and health aspects, and continue to invest in new features and functionality.
Okay. And finally, we touched on this a bit about some of the travel startup founders that are kind of just in the very early stages of development right now. What might be 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you might have for those folks?
Definitely ask for as much advice as possible. There's pretty good playbooks out there around how to scale businesses. Think carefully about whether you want to focus on the consumer side or on the B2B side. I could rattle off probably a dozen different companies that started consumer and kind of ended up on the B2B side, Traxo included. I'm happy to chat with any founders that are considering or have started the journey. I had a lot of help along the way, and I'm happy to pay it forward with insights from the trenches and the battle scars and the wounds along the way. So yeah, it's an incredibly tumultuous journey, but an incredibly rewarding journey, and I certainly wouldn't change it for the world.
Well, that's great. That's a generous offer of you to offer your time in that way. And we are now out of time. So I want to thank you so much, Andres, for spending some time with us, sharing some of your insights. And once again, we'd like to thank our partners at Medallia, who can show you how to use text messaging to remove non-essential interactions, provide a superior sense of safety, and deliver an unrivaled guest experience. You can learn more at medallia.com. Thanks so much for joining us. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.